first of all, same as last year, we're going to talk a bit about the wider music business. Why do we need to talk about the wider music business? Because the electronic music business does not operate in isolation from it. Is it different? 100%. But is it shaped by and reflects what is happening in the wider world? Absolutely. So first of all, on the recorded music side, the good news is revenues are still growing well. Not as strongly as last year, about 6% growth overall, but still pretty decent growth, particularly in these uncertain times, right? And don't underestimate the impact of these uncertain times. Because people's ability to go and spend on their Spotify subscription, on a festival ticket, is all shaped by how much money they've got in their pocket. And how much money in their pocket is shaped by things like tariffs and trade agreements and all these things which have got nothing to do with music culture, but have got everything to do with the economy and therefore everything to do with how much money people have to spend. Music publishing, as it has done for a number of years now, actually grew more quickly in streaming revenue terms than the recorded music business. And you'll see this really interesting thing here. You've got this, like, if you take the podium places of revenue growth in streaming, in third place is record labels, in second place is publishers, and in first place are the streaming services. And there's a whole bunch of different reasons going in there, you know, and if anybody wants to dive into what they are, you know, grab me later and I could walk through them. But the bottom line is the streaming services are the ones who are winning most at the moment in streaming. And this is part of a broader picture that digital platforms as a whole are the ones who are winning most. So we go back to this idea of sort of online communities and, you know, sort of, you know, negative speech and all those sort of things, and fragmentation and the things that just characterize what it is to be in the digital entertainment and just life these days. Everybody talks about, oh, well, the gatekeepers have gone. They haven't. They've been replaced by a new gatekeeper, which is the algorithm. So what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what you're watching, you might think you've discovered it, but it is the decision of the algorithm to say that this is what we think you should be watching and listening. So there is more and more power going to the platforms. It's been done in this sort of semi-invisible way, so it's a bit hard to see what's happening. But there's a quote which I thought was some really great sort of 19th century intellectual author. It turns out it was actually from some kids' TV show, but it's the everything's different while all along I thought it was the same. And that's the thing about change, it creeps up on you. You know, so a lot of what I'm going to carry on doing throughout this presentation is say, don't just look at what these things are now. What does this suggest about where we're going to? So the streaming services, so streaming revenue growth was pretty strong. We'll just go back this one slide. You see, you know, labels up 6%, publishers up 11%. But the number of subscribers grown way more quickly. And one of the reasons for this is not just about that streaming services are doing better. It's the rise of the global south. So when we're talking about the global south, we basically mean everywhere that isn't Europe and North America. Nearly 80% of all of the subscribers that were added in 2024 came from the global south. And the year before is about 75, and the year before that about 72. So for 3 years, most of the global market has been driven by markets that have got nothing to do with North America or Europe. This is a realignment of the global recorded music business. Because the recorded music business in the past is all about selling units of stuff, right? If you wanted to buy a record, buy a download, you had to have a certain amount of disposable income. So most of these really big population but low GDP global south markets were never figured highly in the recorded music market. Now we've got a system which can enable you to monetize masses of people without them even necessarily needing to spend. And so we're going to see the rise over the remainder of this decade of the global south, and it's going to be way more than simply subscriber numbers. And the reason is because if you think about, say, in India, even India 15 years ago, thinking about, yeah, shall I start a career as an artist or set up a record label or a, you know, management company? You'd have to be really brave because there wasn't really much chance of you ever actually making much of an income and a career out of it. Now that has changed. And so we're seeing the ingredients for Global South countries to become much more, having sort of music businesses in all its ways beginning to happen, which means more good music is going to be made from those places, and that is going to export more, because in this global connected world, music exports. So the Global South is going to be a much bigger part of music culture going forward. When you look across the board, everything grew, but one of the big things that's really important is that live music revenues, they were absolutely flying post-COVID. That slowed down a lot last year. Still growth, but a lot of that growth came from higher ticket prices. And in a lot of instances, fewer tickets were sold, but at higher ticket prices. So that is one of those early warning signs about maybe we're just beginning to saturate this fan economy. Now, everybody's obsessing with super fans. Well, maybe A, fans aren't super enough, and B, there's only so much money you can take out of their pocket. If at the same time you're trying to sell them some Ariana Grande hoodie scented candles CD bundle and a sort of $200 VIP experience, well, that money's coming from the same wallet, and there's only so much cash in it. For sake of time, and I always do this, I always spend too much time on some slides and not enough time on the other. I'm going to whiz through a couple. This is just to really emphasize this bit about where live is at. Still growing, still a massive market. This is not crisis time, but we are probably getting at the stage where we do need to think about, just because you can price it higher doesn't necessarily mean you should. So a few takeaways from it. One I didn't talk about, but it's a really, really important one. Most of you will probably know about the sort of two-tier licensing, artist-centric, whatever you want to call it. This is a system where basically tracks below a certain number of streams over a certain period will either get paid nothing or get paid less, and that money then goes and gets shared with those tracks, which do get played a lot. We saw in 2024 the independent artists, those self-releasing without a record label, their revenue growth massively slowed down because of this, even though there were way more people. There's 8.5 million self-releasing artists now. That was up from about 6.9 or so the year before. So massive growth in the number of self-releasing artists, but they're earning less because they were demonetized. And if you think about the way, dance music, more than probably most genres, exists on this massive ecosystem of small dance labels putting out a massive number of tracks every month that have a relatively short half-life. So what that means is lots of independent labels, lots of independent dance labels are from this year onwards going to be looking at lots of their catalogue earning them nothing anymore. But somebody else is earning from their royalties. That is going to be a really important pain point going forward. This is looking at Spotify monthly listeners. And before you get confused about the numbers, how can you have more listeners than you do a population? It's because you can be a listener of multiple different artists and it all just gets added up. 15% growth in electronic music monthly listeners. Mexico, 60% up. Massive, massive growth in Mexico, which is already a good big dance market, but now growing so much more. The really interesting markets are Australia and the Netherlands. Right, so you've got more than 10 times as many monthly listeners to electronic music than you have population. And I think this is just a really important thing to remember is dance music culture may be everywhere, but it's especially so in some markets more than others. And this, I think, really illustrates it. In the markets where electronic music is top or second, electronic music is top or second in 9 out of 13 of its top markets. And when you look at those top two sort of orangey yellow dots, that's Latin. Now, Latin music, if you look at it on a global level, looks huge. It's one of the top 4 global genres, massive social figures and whatever else. But it is highly regional. If you take out Latin America from Latin music, it's dramatically smaller. And that's one of these challenges. As the world begins to demarcate culturally, the idea of looking at the big numbers, looking at the global numbers, make less and less sense, because actually what they are is a collection of incredibly different regional figures. For sake of time, I'm going to whiz on. Oh, this is worth listening to. 0.6 billion more social fans for electronic music in 2024. Again, it's a cumulative total, so it's all adding up. But that is a massive increase in fandom. So you probably noticed one thing that's coming out of this. The revenue figures were good, but not spectacular. The fandom and the culture figures are incredibly strong, though. And underpinning a lot of this is scenes. So, scenes is something everybody in dance music culture just instinctively knows what scenes are. But the nature of what scenes are is changing a lot. And particularly this tension between what is an online scene, it's like, it's like cottagecore on TikTok versus what is a real world scene like UKG. And that separation is really important. Because you look at the top thing when you look at people, what matters to them as being part of a scene, it's the real world part of it. And the bit I love down at the bottom, that dance music fans, much more than overall consumers think, it's because people don't get us. It's that part of being something that's just you that others don't get. So this idea of scenes is going to become more and more important because superstars are getting smaller, everything is fragmenting, and it's time to look simply beyond the stream counts, beyond the social numbers, and much more try to measure the cultural impact, even though that's nearly impossible to do, but that's probably a good thing. Because if it's not measurable, it's harder for people to go and overtly commercialize it. Right, so before we get on to some of the really good stuff, think again and again about the growing role of music culture, because that is the fuel in the engine. It's like all the other things, like revenue and stream counts and social and whatever else, if you want to measure them, they will come as a result of a culture. So this is the fact that the culture indicators are beginning to really light up in 24, I think points for a really strong couple of years coming up. So into the industry, here on the island, as with the overall live music business, revenues were up, but number of tickets were down slightly. So again, it's this thing about charging people more, and you keep charging people more until they can't afford it anymore. I'm sure there are plenty of you from the live music business in here. There's this sort of sense within the live music business that there is so much demand. We're only pricing at what people are willing to pay. And that is true, and this is all this thing about pricing elasticity. But the thing about elastic, if you stretch it too much, it snaps. And there will come that point at which people will just say, I literally can't afford any more for this at the moment. And this is where I think some of the most interesting bits of what happened last year, some of the changes in the genres. So a few of these slides I'm going to go through is going to talk, you'll see a bunch of data showing the same trend, but from different directions. First of all, this is Beatport top genres in terms of sales on the download store. Last year, we saw Afro House really begin to rise. It has absolutely rocketed in 24. Drum and bass is in a sort of real era of resurgence. And we're beginning to see things like UKG really beginning to come to the fore. And when I was talking about how, thinking about the culture, not just, the measuring the performance metrics, it's when we look on what people are watching, what they're engaging with, the samples people are using, you see even more some of these emerging genres. So this is looking at Loop Cloud, the sample marketplace. So these are the samples people are putting in the track. So this gives us a sense of what's coming rather than what has been. And look at the fast rising genres, dominated by African music genres. But also we're seeing sort of the rise of hardcore and hard dance, whereas things like ambient and chill out are going down, losing share. Because culture reflects the world around us. It's a crappy world out there at the moment. There are wars and famine and inequality, and that's, I think, really beginning to come through in the music that people are making and the music that people are listening to. And looking at Beatport's revenues on a global basis, you see it's still a market, and this is broadly reflective of the global electronic music market. It is still one which is heavily reliant upon Europe and North America, but is beginning to widen. And I think the remainder of this decade is going to be a case of push and pull. right? So the pull is that the Global South is going to be getting more of culture, generating more of the fans, more of the users, and the push is that companies need to do more to be part of that. Now, the challenge is, and one of the reasons why the West dominates, is because the West has more GDP. Consumers spend more in these markets. They've got more money to spend, so they're always going to over-index in terms of revenue. But when we come into terms of the culture and the audience, more and more that is going to be Global South. On TikTok, look at this, 45% growth in electronic music hashtags on TikTok. Amapiano, again, and one of the, the biggest growth in video creations. I personally, my dance music genre is probably the least cool of all dance music genres, trance. But look, second biggest growth in video creations. So again, this points to the fact there is all of these cultural indicators that are growing more strongly than the revenue indicators are. This is BPI official charts, company data, so going back to the revenue figures, not as strong a story, right? No dance tracks in the year-end year-end top 10 at all. And they've never been that many, but I would actually say don't pay too much attention to this because everything is fragmenting. The idea of what is big is as much a reflection of how big the marketing campaign is as how important the culture is. And Charlie XCX's Brat Summer is a really good example because it wasn't about one track. It wasn't even about the album. It was this cultural movement. She affected so much culture. And I think that is going to be more and more about how we see music culture as a whole, but dance music culture as well evolving. Measure it in terms of how it is affecting people rather than simply how it is affecting the numbers. Look at SoundCloud. Again, really strong growth. And then UKG, 100% growth in uploads. Jungle uploads up 45%. So we've seen some genres in particular really coming through. And these tend to be the genres which are really beginning to be owned by, Gen Z, even Gen Alpha, sort of people putting on their own little parties. SoundCloud's got so many of these like bootleg remakes. You've seen like teenagers doing remakes of like 90s classics and putting out one every couple of weeks. Of course, they can never go and get the rights cleared and put it onto Spotify or whatever else. So a lot of this culture is just happening online on places like SoundCloud. One of the big things is wherever there is success, money follows. And big institutional investors have been investing in music catalogs for a long period of time, and now they're really beginning to turn their attention to electronic music too. We still don't, there's no getting away from it. Mainly what happens is old white males invest in old white males. So you still see all the Bob Dylans and everyone else get invested in, but we are beginning to see more and more of other genres. And dance music, as a share of the deals done, twice the share it was a couple of years, 4 years ago. In terms of festivals, so this is looking at the lineups of the top 100 festivals globally. There was a significant uplift from 23, really big uplift from 24, and sort of slightly close to about where it was in 22, which was this massive boom year for dance music artists. So 18% of the rosters of the lineups of festivals were electronic music artists. And this includes, by the way, all the festivals that have no electronic artists at all. Some of them are 100%, but a good, steady increase in the role. And this is the year, of course, that Superstruck sold for $1.4 billion. So there's, again, where there is success, the money follows too. Really, really important bit. Every year, we put something in about the dance music gender divide, and it is a really big divide. In terms of the number of people who are producing music, the number of people who are DJing, this is still a heavily male world, but we are beginning to see change. It's not dramatic, but it's good, steady progress, and there are more and more female DJ icons as well, who give more women the idea that they want to go, that they can go and do it too. So again, this is one of those push and pull things. The pull is happening, but it needs pushing too. So next year, don't want to see that. Oh, we're up to 78%. Let's nudge that along another 5, 6, 7%. And then drum and bass, so and jungle. So we've got Rufy and Sylvia have put together this really big, amazing report, which is going to be on some time or another here later. Definitely go and see it. This is just one of a couple of the key highlights from it. It's number 2 for Beatport new releases. And we remember from the chart of Beatport downloads, the revenue is it's going up and up in terms of rankings and samples. And I think I've been into dance music for nearly 30 years now. Many genres in dance music, they're good, but they haven't really moved the needle that much in the last 10 years or so. There are some genres, and drum and bass and jungle in particular, which are complete, I would say, are better now than they were in the OG days. And I think this again really goes back to the idea of this younger generation claiming it for themselves. I love the way that some of this like snooty snobbery around things like techno and drum and bass. Well, that's, you can't put that in there. You can get a techno DJ like Sarah Landry dropping a 150 BPM remix of the Venga Boys in a track. Can you imagine a techno DJ 20 years being allowed to do it? I don't know, there's probably a bunch of you in the room going, no, that's sacrilege. But I love the fact that it is not taking itself as seriously as it used to. So, key implications, gender gap is narrowing, but there's still loads more work to do. Electronic music's global south reach was reflected in the rise of Afrobeat and Amapiano. I think overall with these numbers, there is nothing to suggest that these cultural changes is going to change. In fact, if anything, these numbers suggest that this is going to accelerate. So, finally, and I have 17 seconds, no, I'm over 17 seconds to go through the big number you've all been waiting for. $12.9 billion was the value of the electronic music industry in 2024. That includes merchandise and sponsorship and live and recorded music and publishing and music software and music hardware, festivals and clubs and expanded rights. Everything is in there. And 6% growth. That might not sound huge, but remember, live music revenues, festivals and clubs, which is a really big part of the revenue mix, is beginning to slow. So that sort of drags down the overall numbers. But most importantly, it's the culture is absolutely booming. And with 0.6 billion new social followers of electronic music artists in 2024, they're the foundations for what are set to be a few really vibrant years for electronic music. So I think that is it. Thank you very much.